Hi, it's Sherry at Savvy Business Resolutions with another episode of Investing in Conversation, Conflict Management for Managers. Last week, we started looking at barriers to understanding. In case you haven't been with us from the beginning, in the very first episode, I was talking to Julian Treasure about listening, and he highlighted the importance of understanding. It's what defines the success or failure of a communication, and when it's not there, it causes conflict. So I thought, well, I'll follow that by looking at a number of things that block understanding, and I started, rationally enough, with language. This time, we'll bust another myth, get the benefit of more of Chris Arnhem's experience, and I'll give you a conversational investment tip all about how information itself gets in the way of understanding. That brings me to this week's myth. More is more, surely. When you're trying to explain something to somebody and they're just not getting it, it's easy to assume that all they need is more information, isn't it? I know, I've done it. But as I've said on the blog, the trouble with assumption is that it's a breeding ground for misunderstanding, and that means it's a breeding ground for conflict. The two biggest challenges in organisational communication are unequivocality, making sure that information is only open to one interpretation, and certainty, making sure there are no gaps in it. In other words, clarity and completeness. But you don't need me to tell you, the conflict between those two crops up in one-to-one interactions as well as one-to-many or one-to-a-few. Whatever the situation, too much information actually can shut down understanding rather than opening it up. At the most basic level, when we don't understand what we hear or we read, we stop taking it in. So you really can end up in a situation where the more you talk, the less anybody else listens. I've been there as well. In future episodes, we'll look at some external factors that create or at least aggravate that issue. Right now, though, I want to focus on two internal obstacles which are common to everyone, but unique to each one of us. I'm talking about attention and memory. Along with time, attention is conversational investment capital, at least that's what I call it. That's my way of saying it's a precious commodity. But I'm not alone in that. Researchers who know a lot more about these things than I do across a range of disciplines have come to the conclusion it's a finite resource, including Professor Michael Proulx of the University of Bath. He was just a doctor when I first knew him. Just!
It's been very clear for at least 20 years now that we only consciously perceive what we're paying attention to.
Yeah.
And attention has a very narrow ability to pick up on information.
These days, I think we're all aware of the tug-of-war between attention and information, aren't we? It's easy to imagine that's a modern challenge. But back in 1971, Herbert Simon pointed out that a wealth of information creates a poverty of attention. He was considered to be quite ahead of his time at that stage, but he was looking at it from two perspectives, as an economist and a psychologist. Where we invest our attention doesn't only affect what we're aware of in the present, it also helps to shape what we remember. I say helps to because the human memory is a slippery beast that needs to be handled with care, and anything it tells you should be taken with a hefty dose of scepticism. One of the people who taught me that was the late Professor Suzanne Corkin.
It's just a normal phenomenon to misremember. And a great example is eyewitness testimony. There could be some horrible kind of accident and somebody goes around and asks the witnesses what they remember, and they can remember very different things. And often this comes out in court, and it can be used to the detriment of the person who's being tried for this crime or whatever it is.
Sometimes the more information we're given to begin with, the more we lose over time. Every complex message you send has to juggle clarity and completeness. But the most significant battleground has to be the contracts that lay the foundations of our business relationships. It's no coincidence that clarity and completeness bear a striking resemblance to the legal drafting dilemma that retired solicitor Chris Arnheim was talking about last time. Clarity versus precision. When I trained in the law, I was told that contracts had to be written in legalese so that they were clear to judges. But I was never entirely convinced by that, and neither was Chris.
I think it's dangerous to have agreements that only judges can understand. I think clients need to understand their own agreements. I think it's one of the most frightening things for a lawyer to have clients who don't understand the agreements you've written for them.
Yeah, I'd have to agree with that. I had enough clients come through the door back when I was in practice who said, I've signed this agreement and I really don't understand it, and now they're coming after me for breach of contract, but I don't know what I've done.
Yeah, I mean, I think that it's really important that clients are told in terms that they can understand what the agreement is about and how it affects them in particular situations. But the danger is that they don't fully understand it at the time, or if they do, they forget over time, and when they come back to look at it in 6 months or a year's time, they've got a misunderstanding as to what the agreement says. Often legal agreements are written in terms that are quite difficult to sort of just pick up with no context and make sense of. The legal approach that's developed in this country over the last 15 years, largely by a judge called Lord Hoffman, is that context is the only thing that really matters to the meaning of the words that you're using in a legal document. So if there is not enough context, or the context is ambiguous, then the document may be hard to understand or hard for a judge to rule on. And I think what that means in practice is that you have to build as much context and background as you can into the legal document. I've recently been working with a client, a small professional services business set up by 5 people 20 years ago. It's been very successful, and they're now thinking of retiring over the next 5 to 15 years. But they want to do it in a way that's going to be cooperative and enhance the business rather than fighting over who leaves first or who leaves last, and how they decide.
And that's always a challenge.
Well, so, I mean, we've written an agreement which is basically an agreement to cooperate and to behave fairly and reasonably, all of which are quite countercultural and unusual. And those sort of concepts only really make sense if you can explain the benefits to the business and the individuals of cooperation and what it's likely to mean by giving specific examples. And that's what we've done.
Yeah.
And there was a highlight in the meeting when one of the clients asked me whether this was usual, and I said no, but I thought it was still in their interest to sign it. Lawyers are very reluctant to do things that are out of the ordinary.
Yeah, traditional lot, aren't we?
Yeah.
And that's probably why the language hasn't changed for centuries.
Well, we use precedents because we're frightened to do our own thinking some of the time, or maybe because it's better to rely on something that's already been invented. It saves time. But sometimes the precedent of the last case isn't suitable for the one that's currently in front of you.
That's a common thing, isn't it? Particularly now, because it's so easy for somebody starting in business, for instance, to nip onto the internet, grab a set of terms and conditions that look like they might fit, as you might run in and grab a coat off the rack that looks roughly to be your size. But the only problem is they're taking these coats home and then cutting them about to make them fit. And, well, there are a few risks there, aren't there?
Yeah. It is empowering that you can find precedents on the internet, but you need to understand whether the precedent has been drafted in favour of you as buyer or you as seller, or the other way around. And you need to be able to adapt it to your specific situation and for it still to make sense to a judge.
How do you do that? I mean, I've done it a few times, but with legal training. If you haven't got legal training...
There are a lot of things that lawyers think are obvious to the clients when they're not. If you cross out provisions, the rest of the agreement may not make any sense anymore.
Yeah.
If you change a provision but don't do it in the clause that you're trying to change, you do it somewhere else, it's really difficult to read the agreement at a later date because it might say that the price is 100 in one place, but it's 200 somewhere else.
Yeah.
So, I mean, lawyers use cross-references and definitions to make documents easier, but, we've learned how to do that over a lifetime. And it's quite hard sometimes for clients to amend documents that they want to use and for them to be effective. One of the things that's most jarring when you're using internet precedent is the language used by the precedent itself and the language used by the client in amending it.
Yes.
And in many cases, it will almost be better for the client to start with a blank sheet of paper and write down the background as to what they're trying to achieve and how they want to achieve it. And I think a judge would get closer to enforcing what the clients had actually agreed in that case than a mishmash of client drafting and precedent.
Because some clauses and contracts can be thrown out as unenforceable because they're just, no one can quite work out what they're saying, can't they?
Yes, I mean, judges have done a lot in the last few years in enforcing agreements that mean the opposite of what they say, but only when that's clear from the context.
Yeah, so we come back to the context again, which is what's defining the whole thing.
Yes, absolutely. Some lawyers spend a lot of time summarising contracts. So you have a 100-page contract and you summarise it into 3 pages of highlights for the client. And there are pros and cons of producing summaries. They can be enormously helpful in promoting a client understanding. But equally, they obviously are an oversimplification of the 100-page document.
Yes.
So you can't rely on a summary as a full representation. I always produce summaries of contracts for my clients before they sign them because I think it promotes understanding of what's there. And if they see something in the summary that is news to them, then we need to, go over the contract very carefully and change what it says. But you do need a strong element of trust between the client and their lawyer before the lawyer will be happy producing summaries, because the client can't expect the summary to be comprehensive. It's just not possible. A 3-page document can never be as comprehensive as a 100-page document. I have a non-lawyer wife and 2 non-lawyer children, and when I'm writing to clients or writing documents for clients, I try and write in a way that I could, if I was writing to the family. Sometimes you can't do it because you need to draw on legal concepts which take pages and pages to explain, but most of the time you can write in plain language and it is a lot easier.
And we can certainly speak in plain language. I mean, it strikes me, I've seen a number of lawyers doing presentations over the years, and sometimes they are presenting as though reading from a textbook or as though reading from a statute. And if you're talking to an audience of your potential clients, that's probably not the easiest way to get the information across, is it?
It's a good illustration of the battle between precision and clarity. So the lawyer who sounds like a textbook is worrying too much about being precise. And the lawyer who sounds quite unlike a lawyer has probably achieved clarity.
But maybe not precision.
Exactly.
It's a battle.
It is a battle, and like most battles, there's a balance to be struck somewhere in the middle.
So we come to this week's tip. Contracts are supposed to be communication tools. They're meant to communicate between the parties, between them and anyone else who has to deal with the agreement, and, as Chris was saying, between the present and the future. The trouble is, so many fall at the final hurdle. Yep, they can be seen, heard, or read, but not understood. If you want to take a proactive approach to conflict management and you don't have a legal background, please invest in a conversation with a legal professional. Okay, you will have to throw some money at it, and of course you will need some time and attention as well. But making sure that you've got the right contracts in place, that they are fit for your purposes, that they're up to date, that you and anyone else who needs to understand the essentials of them, and of course that you and they understand anything you're going to sign on behalf of the business, will save you far more than you spend. Honestly, as I talk to you now, it's a far better deal than the stock market. I've got to put my money where my mouth is on this one, actually. We need some new documentation, and some of it I could draft myself, but some of it is outside my experience. And I've been looking at it all, and I just thought, no, do you know what? I'm going to give it to someone who does it for a living. I used to, I don't anymore. Someone else can do it. As we've talked about clarity and completeness and contracts in this show, I'll finish with a couple of legal cases where it wasn't even clear whether or not there was a contract. Before I get into those, a bit of context. For a contract to exist, there has to have been an offer, which was accepted, and the acceptance has to have been communicated. I particularly like Lord Denning's explanation. He was famous, or maybe infamous, for his storytelling style when he delivered his judgments. And in a case in 1955, he said, if a man shouts an offer to another man across a river, but the other doesn't hear because there's an aircraft flying over, there's no acceptance because it hasn't been communicated. I've never actually met anyone who made a deal across a river near an airport, but you get the idea. So, with that in mind, generations of law students learnt about Carlisle versus the Carbolic Smokeball Company. I was among them. In the early 1890s, there was a flu epidemic, and the Carbolic Smokeball Company cashed in. They developed a product which was a ball full of carbolic acid, and you stuck a pipe up your nose. And they said, if you use this regularly, 3 times a day, for I think it was 3 weeks, we are so convinced that you won't catch the flu, we will pay you if you do. And they said that they'd put some money in the bank to back them up. Anyway, Mrs. Carlisle bought one of these things, and she used it religiously, as per their instructions, but she still caught the flu. Surprise, surprise. So she claimed her compensation. And the company said, no, we didn't mean it. It was just an advert. It was just a promotion. But the court on that occasion said, no, you made her believe that you were serious. It looks like an offer. She has accepted. Now pay up. But before you start worrying about what you put into adverts, just over 100 years later, in 1999, we get Leonard versus PepsiCo Inc., the Pepsi Points case. Now, this one does make me laugh because this was a case in America where Pepsi were doing a promotion. They'd started it a few years earlier, so like a loyalty scheme, so people could collect points and they could redeem them against various things, T-shirts, jackets, that kind of stuff. But in the late 90s, they put out a TV ad which showed a kid flying to school in a Harrier jump jet. And they said you could get this jet for 7 million Pepsi points. Well, young Mr. Leonard, who was a student at the time, was 21, noticed on the advert that Pepsi points could be bought directly from the company. Mostly they would be earned by the number of cans you drank, but he saw the loophole. So he persuaded 4 or 5 investors to give him enough money to buy these points, $700,000. Anyway, he sent off the cheque and said, please can I have my jet? And Pepsi said, don't be so silly. It was just a humorous advert. And he said, no, you made an offer. You said, you can have this jet for 7 million Pepsi points. You also said, you can buy these Pepsi points, which I have done. Now, please can I have my plane? Well, this time, common sense prevailed. And the judge in New York also said, don't be so silly. It was meant to be a funny advert. There's a lovely line in the judgment which goes, I'm not reading this, I'm doing it from memory, so forgive me if it's not accurate, but it's something like, this young man shouldn't be trusted with the keys to his parents' car, let alone an aircraft that's vital to American defence. I can't help wondering whether he actually believed this was a real offer, or whether he was just chancing his arm. I don't know. On that note, I will wish you a peaceful and productive week, and I'll talk to you next time. If you need help with any aspect of conflict management at work, come and talk to me. All my details are on the website, savvybusinessresolutions.com.